The story begins with Sophie meeting her mother. Her mother is shocked by how thin Sophie has become and begs her to stop being stubborn. She tells Sophie that 3 years of suffering is already more than enough and asks her to come home. Sophie quietly asks for just 2 more days. Her mother becomes emotional and tells her that she has never asked Sophie for much in her life, but this time she is begging her to leave with her. Sophie still refuses, saying she needs to go home and cook. Someone nearby suggests taking Sophie away by force, but her mother knows her daughter too well. Sophie cannot be forced, so she decides to wait a little longer. Meanwhile, Sophie's husband, Ethan Carter, believes he has been doing everything right. He earns $42,000 a month and gives every cent to his mother to manage. But despite earning so much, Ethan complains that for 3 years, he has often come home from work without a proper hot meal. One evening, he asks Sophie what there is to eat. She tells him there are frozen dumplings in the refrigerator. Ethan becomes frustrated. He reminds her that he earns $42,000 a month and hands over all of it. In his mind, Sophie has no job and does not do enough housework, so he cannot understand why she cannot even prepare dinner. He also brings up his mother's complaints. His mother often says Sophie is lazy, and Ethan thinks he has been protecting Sophie by dealing with those complaints himself. But Sophie sees it differently. Whenever Ethan's mother criticizes her, Ethan never truly defends her. If his mother says Sophie is lazy, Ethan agrees. If she says Sophie spends too much money, Ethan says he will handle it. To Sophie, Ethan has always treated his mother as if she can never be wrong. Not long after, Sophie's health suddenly becomes serious enough that she ends up at the hospital. The doctor tells Ethan that Sophie has a severe stomach ulcer caused by long-term malnutrition. The damage is extensive, and if she had waited much longer, she could have suffered a perforation or internal bleeding. The doctor makes it clear that her condition did not appear overnight. It had developed over years. Ethan is stunned and asks Sophie why she was not eating properly. Sophie tells him that she already told him they did not have enough money. But Ethan never believed her. He insists that it makes no sense because he earns $42,000 every month. Then Sophie tells him to ask his mother. That is when Ethan finally asks the question he should have asked years ago. How much money had his mother actually been giving Sophie each month? Sophie answers only $200. Ethan cannot believe it. That night he goes straight to his parents' house. His mother greets him normally and asks whether he had a fight with Sophie. But Ethan is not there to talk about their marriage. He asks her directly how much household money she gives Sophie every month. At first, his mother becomes defensive and asks whether Sophie sent him there to complain. Ethan keeps pushing until she finally admits the truth. She gives Sophie only $200 a month, and she sees nothing wrong with it. She argues that Sophie does not work and that the couple mostly eats at home, so $200 should be enough. She even compares it to the past, saying families used to survive on only a few dozen UN a month. Ethan tells her times have changed. Even a small amount of meat costs money now, and $200 cannot possibly cover a month of groceries. His mother responds by accusing Sophie of wasting money. She claims Sophie can spend $200 just doing her hair, but Ethan immediately realizes something is wrong with that accusation. Sophie has not even had a haircut in 2 years. Now Ethan becomes suspicious. For 3 years, he has been giving his mother $42,000 every month, so he asks where all that money has gone. His mother tells him he does not need to know because she is his mother. She insists she would never cheat him and claims she saved the money for him. Ethan demands to know how much she actually saved. Cornered, she begins to explain. When Ethan's sister Mia wanted to buy a property and was short $300,000, his mother used Ethan's money to help her. When Ryan Cole started a company and needed cash, she gave him more than $100,000. She also says Ethan's father had hospital bills of about $80,000, but Ethan quickly realizes those numbers do not add up. Those expenses explain only around $500,000. Over 3 years, Ethan had given his mother about $1.5 million. There is still a huge amount missing. His mother becomes angry and accuses him of turning against her because of Sophie. She says Sophie must have sent him there because she only cares about money. Then she tells Ethan to leave and declares that if he chooses Sophie, she will no longer consider him her son. At that moment, Ethan's father comes out. Ethan immediately asks him for the truth. He wants to know exactly how much of his money was given to Mia and Ryan. His father finally admits that around $700,000 to $800,000 was given to them. Ethan is devastated. For 3 years, he worked hard and handed over nearly all his income because he believed it was being used for his own family. Instead, most of that money was being used to support his sister and other relatives. And while they received hundreds of thousands, Sophie was left trying to survive on only $200 a month. Only now does Ethan finally understand what his wife had been going through all along. After discovering that most of his hard-earned money had been given to his sister and her husband, Ethan immediately called Mia. It was already late, but Ethan didn't care. He wanted to know exactly what Mia and Ryan had done with his money. Mia showed no remorse. She simply told Ethan that their mother had given them the money. So as far as she was concerned, it belonged to her, but Ethan couldn't accept that. That money came from his salary. For 3 years, he had worked non-stop, constantly doing overtime and pushing himself so hard that he had even suffered stomach bleeding. Mia dismissed his anger. She argued that once Ethan handed the money to their mother, it became their mother's money, and she could give it to whoever she wanted. Then Ethan brought up Sophie. While Mia and Ryan were receiving hundreds of thousands, Sophie had been surviving on only $200 a month. But even that didn't bother Mia. She said Sophie didn't work, so $200 should have been enough. That was the final straw. Ethan demanded that Mia return his money. Mia refused immediately, telling him she had no money and that he could ask whoever he wanted. After ending the call, Ethan rushed back to the hospital to see Sophie. But when he asked for her room, the nurse told him Sophie had already discharged herself an hour earlier. Her condition still wasn't good, and the doctor had told her she needed rest. But Sophie insisted on leaving and said she was going home. Ethan tried calling her. Her phone was switched off. He hurried home and found Sophie already there. When he asked why she had left the hospital so early, Sophie simply said there was no point lying there when she could rest at home. Ethan then told her what he had discovered. He had confronted his family and learned that roughly $700,000 to $800,000 of his money had gone toward Mia's house investments and Ryan's business. But Sophie had something she needed him to understand too. For 3 years, she had barely spent anything on herself. She hadn't bought a single new outfit. She refused to buy shampoo costing more than 20 yuan. Even when Ethan's mother had a birthday, Sophie gave her 500 yuan in cash, money she had slowly saved by cutting back on their grocery expenses. Then came New Year. In front of all their relatives, Ethan's mother humiliated Sophie for not buying her a new down jacket. She called Sophie stingy and unfilial. Sophie said nothing. She endured it because she kept telling herself that none of it mattered as long as Ethan treated her well. But now she admitted the painful truth. Ethan had never really stood by her. Whenever his mother called Sophie lazy, Ethan believed she was lazy. Whenever his mother accused Sophie of wasting money, Ethan assumed she was irresponsible. Not once had he stopped to ask Sophie whether any of it was true. In fact, after 3 years of marriage, Ethan didn't even know what his own wife ate every day. Ethan was overwhelmed with guilt and apologized. But for Sophie, an apology was no longer enough. She placed divorce papers in front of him. She wanted nothing from him. The house belonged to his mother, and the car was in Ethan's name. Sophie wasn't asking for either one. She simply wanted to leave. Ethan refused to sign. For the first time, he admitted how badly he had failed her. For 3 years, he had blindly trusted everything his mother told him without ever considering what Sophie was experiencing. He begged Sophie to give him 1 month. After that month, if she still wanted to leave, he promised he wouldn't stop her. But Sophie had already waited for 3 years. She wasn't giving him another month. She gave him 1 day. The next morning, Ethan immediately began making changes. His first stop was the finance department at work. He changed his payroll account so that his salary would no longer be deposited into the card controlled by his mother. Then he took the day off. With the last 200 when he had available, Ethan bought groceries and basic household necessities. For perhaps the first time in their marriage, Sophie came home to find Ethan preparing food for her. He told her to sit down and rest. He had learned the recipe online, and although he knew it might not be very good, he promised he would keep learning. Then Ethan told Sophie something else. From now on, when he received his salary, he would manage it himself and make sure their household had the money it needed. Sophie immediately warned him. His mother would never accept that. Ethan knew she was right, and it didn't take long. When payday arrived and Ethan's salary failed to appear in his mother's account, she immediately called him. She demanded to know where his paycheck was. Ethan calmly told her that from now on, he would manage his own salary. His mother instantly blamed Sophie. She was convinced Sophie had manipulated her son into changing the account. Ethan told her clearly that Sophie had nothing to do with the decision. He had made it himself. But his mother became furious and threatened to come to their home and throw Sophie out herself. This time, Ethan didn't back down. He told her she was welcome to try. After the call, Sophie knew exactly what would happen next. His mother would come looking for them, but Ethan was ready. Sophie had endured his family for 3 years. If he couldn't finally stand between his wife and the people who had mistreated her, then he didn't deserve to call himself her husband. Meanwhile, Ethan began looking deeper into where his money had gone. He asked for information about the company connected to Ryan, including its legal representative, shareholders, registered capital, paid-in capital, and annual filings. He was no longer willing to accept his family's explanations. He wanted evidence. Soon afterward, Mia also confronted him about changing his salary account. She accused Ethan of losing his mind and insisted that their mother had always been acting in the family's best interests. But Ethan was no longer interested in excuses. He wanted to know exactly how much of his money had gone to Ryan. And before the conflict could settle, his furious mother finally arrived. The moment she saw Sophie, she began insulting her, calling her a shameless woman who had turned her son against his own mother. But this time, Sophie was no longer standing alone. Ethan immediately stepped between them. For 3 years, he had allowed his mother to insult and mistreat his wife. That ended now. He warned his mother that if she had a problem, she could take it out on him. But if she dared lay a hand on Sophie again, then she should never call him her son again. The next day, Ethan's mother arrived at his home furious. The moment she entered, she began crying and accusing Ethan of abandoning his own mother for his wife. She complained that after raising him all these years, he had become an ungrateful son who cared more about keeping Sophie happy than about his own family. Ethan had heard enough. He calmly told his mother to stop making a scene and simply say why she had come. Then she noticed the divorce papers. Immediately, she pointed at Sophie and claimed this proved everything she had been saying. In her mind, Sophie had been planning to break up the family all along. When she tried to confront Sophie directly, Ethan stepped in front of his wife. He told Sophie not to worry. This time, he was there to protect her. Ethan's father tried to calm the situation. He insisted that Ethan's mother hadn't deliberately wasted his money. According to him, they had saved whatever they could, and only spent money when the family genuinely needed it. Mia was Ethan's biological sister, he argued. When she struggled financially, naturally her parents wanted to help her. But Ethan refused to accept that explanation. Nearly 800,000 yuan had been taken from his earnings without his permission. That wasn't helping someone. To Ethan, it was stealing. His mother became furious and demanded that he return his salary card immediately. She wanted all 42,000 yuan of his monthly salary again, just as before. Ethan gave her a simple answer. No. His salary card would remain with him, and he would no longer hand over his paycheck. His mother couldn't believe what she was hearing. Once again, she blamed Sophie, accusing her of somehow controlling Ethan and turning him against his own mother. But Ethan stopped her. Sophie had nothing to do with his decision. For the first time in 3 years, Ethan could clearly see where his money had gone and what his wife had been forced to live on. His family tried to remind him that they were his real family. They claimed Sophie was manipulating him for money. After all, she didn't have a job and stayed home all day. But Ethan was no longer fooled by those accusations. He turned the questions back on them. Sophie had received only 200 yuan a month. So how much did his mother spend every month? How had Mia's husband afforded his Mercedes? And who had paid for Ryan's expensive trip? Suddenly, no one wanted to answer. Ethan's father again tried to justify everything. Mia needed help buying a home. Ryan needed money for his business. His father had medical expenses. And supposedly, whatever remained had been saved for Ethan. So Ethan asked to see the savings. Where was the money? Where was the bank book? His mother refused to show him anything. She told Ethan that she was his mother and that he should simply trust her. But Ethan couldn't accept that anymore. That money represented 3 years of exhausting overtime, years in which he had worked himself so hard that he suffered stomach bleeding. Yet his mother had given huge amounts to Mia and Ryan without even asking him. Ethan finally asked the painful question. Did she even consider him her son? Cornered, his mother finally admitted the truth. The money was gone. She had spent all of it, and she challenged Ethan to do something about it, so Ethan did. He told his family that every cent had to be returned. If they refused, he would take the matter to court. His mother was horrified. She couldn't believe her own son was threatening legal action against her. Mia also attacked Ethan, accusing him of having no conscience, but Ethan immediately reminded her that she had used his money to buy property and support her husband. How could she take his money and then call him heartless for wanting it back? His father begged everyone to calm down. They were family, he said. Was it really necessary to take things this far? Ethan looked at him and explained exactly why it had come to this. Over 3 years, Ethan had handed his mother approximately 1.5 million yen. Meanwhile, Sophie had been forced to survive on only 200 yen a month. She'd become so malnourished that she developed a serious stomach ulcer. So if his family wanted to know who had taken things too far, they needed to look at themselves. Unable to defend herself, Ethan's mother turned her anger towards Sophie again. She called Sophie a homewrecker and blamed her for destroying the family. But Ethan immediately stopped her. None of this was Sophie's fault. If his mother wanted someone to blame, she could blame him. Realizing Ethan would no longer surrender, his mother finally stormed out, warning him that one day he would regret choosing Sophie over his family. After they left, Ethan apologized to Sophie, but Sophie surprised him. She told Ethan that he had handled the confrontation well. Then Ethan confirmed something important. His threat about taking his family to court wasn't empty. He genuinely intended to recover the money. Sophie supported him. After everything they had taken from him, she believed they should be forced to return it. For the first time in years, the couple began acting like partners again. Ethan even offered to make Sophie breakfast, and this time she offered to help. But Ethan was also investigating Ryan's supposed business. Soon he received the results. Ryan's company claimed to have registered capital of 500,000 yuan, but the actual paid-in capital was zero. Ryan Cole was listed as the legal representative, and the company had not even filed proper annual reports. In other words, the impressive company Ryan had supposedly needed Ethan's money to build appeared to be little more than an empty shell. Ethan now had another reason to suspect his family had lied to him. But before he could decide his next move, the conflict followed him to work. An employee approached Ethan and warned him that 2 women had arrived asking to see him. They were his mother and Mia. Before Ethan could stop them, his mother forced her way into the office. This time, she wasn't interested in keeping their family dispute private. In front of Ethan's co-workers, she began shouting. She accused her son of abandoning his mother for a homewrecker, taking his own family to court, and dragging his sister into a lawsuit. Then, in front of everyone, she demanded an answer. What kind of son would do something like that? But what Ethan's co-workers didn't know yet was the reason he had finally turned against his family. After forcing her way into Ethan's workplace, his mother made her demands perfectly clear. She wanted Ethan to hand his salary card back immediately, and that wasn't all. She also ordered him to divorce Sophie. Ethan finally understood why she had caused such a huge scene at his office. This wasn't only about getting control of his salary again. His mother wanted Sophie completely out of his life. When Ethan refused, his mother threatened him. If he wouldn't change the salary account and divorce Sophie, she would come to his workplace every single day and cause trouble until everyone at Nordson Tech knew what kind of son he was. Mia immediately joined in. She told Ethan that he had humiliated their mother so badly that relatives and neighbors were already gossiping about him. According to Mia, everyone was calling Ethan an unfilial son and saying that Sophie had him completely under her control. And in their version of the story, Ethan had turned against his entire family over just 200 yen. But Ethan knew that wasn't the real story. This was about 3 years of his salary disappearing while Sophie was left without enough money even to eat properly. Ethan tried to get his mother to leave. This was his workplace. And if she continued creating scenes there, she could cost him his job. But his mother didn't care. In her mind, if Ethan was no longer handing his salary over to the family, then it made no difference whether he had a job at all. She even confronted Ethan's boss, determined to humiliate her son in front of everyone. Ethan's boss tried to calm her down and suggested that the family settle their problems privately at home, but Ethan's mother refused. She wanted everyone to hear what she had to say. Once again, she accused Ethan of being an ungrateful son who had abandoned his mother because of Sophie. Eventually, Ethan's boss ordered him to deal with the situation immediately because it was disrupting the entire workplace. So Ethan gave his mother his final answer. His salary card was not going back to her, and divorcing Sophie was completely out of the question. His mother couldn't believe it. She reminded Ethan that he was earning 42,000 yuan a month and asked whether he was really willing to risk such a good job because of Sophie. But Ethan had finally realized what mattered to him. He could always find another job. But if Sophie left him for good, he might never get her back. He warned his mother to leave immediately, otherwise he would have security remove her from the building. After the confrontation, Ethan's boss spoke to him privately. Ethan had worked at the company for years, and his technical ability had always been strong, but personal problems spilling into the workplace could damage both Ethan's reputation and the company. Ethan understood. He apologized and requested 3 days off so he could finally deal with everything happening at home. His boss agreed. But Ethan had another problem waiting for him. Sophie had already told him she was finished waiting. She had given him only 1 day to prove that things could change, and Ethan was terrified. For the first time, he truly understood that Sophie might leave and never return. Later that night, when Sophie came back, Ethan was overwhelmed with relief. He had been drinking, and the moment he saw her, he pulled her into a tight embrace. He admitted that he had been terrified she would never come back. Sophie told him to let go because she could barely breathe. She had actually returned only to collect her belongings, but something had made her hesitate. She saw the food Ethan had prepared. She also noticed the injury on his forehead. For the first time in a long time, Sophie could see that Ethan was genuinely trying to change. So instead of leaving immediately, she decided perhaps they could wait a little longer. Ethan was overjoyed. He warmed up the food and asked her to eat. Then Sophie told him something else. Her mother wanted to meet him. Ethan agreed without hesitation and asked when she would be coming. But Sophie still had one more thing she needed to tell him. It concerned her family. Ethan remembered meeting Sophie's mother when they got married. She had dressed simply and never behaved like someone wealthy, although Ethan remembered thinking that she carried herself with unusual elegance. Then Sophie finally revealed the truth about her parents. Her father was Victor Hale, and her mother was Nora Moore. The name immediately stunned Ethan. Nora Moore was the chairwoman of Hale Group. Hale Group wasn't some small family business. It was a publicly listed corporation with annual revenue exceeding 10 billion. With major businesses in real estate and renewable energy, Ethan could barely process what he was hearing. For 3 years, his own family had treated Sophie like a poor, unemployed woman who had married Ethan for his money. His mother had humiliated her over tiny household expenses and accused her of being a gold digger. But Sophie had actually come from a family far wealthier than any of them could have imagined. Stunned, Ethan could only ask one question. If Sophie came from a family like that, Why had she chosen to marry him? Ethan was completely stunned by Sophie's revelation. For 3 years, his family had treated him as the successful husband earning $42,000 a month and Sophie as the poor wife living off his money. But now Ethan jokingly realized the truth. Compared with Sophie's family, he was the poor one. So he asked the obvious question. If Sophie came from such a wealthy family, why had she been forced to survive on only 200 yen a month? Sophie explained that her situation was more complicated than it seemed. When she decided to marry Ethan, her father strongly opposed the relationship because he believed their families were completely mismatched. He warned Sophie that if she insisted on marrying a man without the same financial background, she would have to leave the family and could never come back asking for help. Sophie chose Ethan, and for the next 3 years, she remained separated from her family. Her mother occasionally contacted her in secret, but her father never called her at all. Ethan suddenly realized something else. If Sophie's mother had remained in contact with her, did she already know everything Sophie had suffered during their marriage? Sophie explained that her former classmate, Tessa Nolan, knew her real identity and had been keeping her mother informed. Before Ethan could fully process everything, Sophie told him her mother was already on her way. Soon afterward, Nora Moore arrived. The moment she saw her daughter, her attitude changed completely. She lovingly called Sophie her sweetheart before turning her attention toward Ethan and the tiny home where her daughter had spent the last 3 years. Ethan respectfully invited her inside and offered her water. But Nora wasn't interested in hospitality. She looked around and asked one painful question. After 3 years of marriage, was this really how her daughter had been living? Tessa had already told her about Sophie's hospitalization. She knew about the stomach ulcer. She knew about the severe malnutrition. And most importantly, she knew Sophie had been expected to survive on only 200 yen a month. Ethan immediately admitted that he had failed Sophie. He explained that he genuinely hadn't known his mother was giving Sophie so little money. But Nora wasn't impressed by that excuse. He was Sophie's husband. How could his own wife be barely eating for years without him noticing? Then Nora told Ethan what Sophie's life had been like before marrying him. During university, Sophie had around 20,000 yen every month for personal expenses. She traveled abroad during school holidays. For her birthdays, the family could book an entire hotel for the celebration. Yet after choosing Ethan, this same woman had spent 3 years counting every yuan just to afford food. Sophie tried to stop her mother from saying more, but Nora couldn't ignore what her daughter had endured. 3 years of hardship, 3 years of humiliation, 3 years of being treated like a burden by Ethan's family. Nora had seen enough. She told Ethan directly that she wasn't there for his explanations, and she didn't need his apology. She had come to take her daughter home. Nora asked Sophie to leave with her, but Sophie refused. Her mother couldn't understand. After everything she had suffered, why would she stay? Sophie explained that Ethan had finally started changing, and despite everything that had happened, she wanted to give him one final chance. Nora reluctantly turned to Ethan. If her daughter was determined to stay, then she wanted to know exactly what Ethan intended to do. Ethan promised to fix the problems he had allowed to grow for 3 years. First, he would deal with his own family himself. He would legally recover the money his mother had taken from his salary. From now on, Sophie would control their household finances, and Ethan promised that she would never again be left without enough money to live. Nora listened carefully. Then she gave him a deadline. 1 month. That was all the time Ethan would get. Within that month, his family problems had to be settled completely. His mother could no longer be allowed to come into their home and abuse Sophie. The money taken by Mia had to be recovered. And most importantly, Ethan had to make sure Sophie recovered physically from the damage caused by years of malnutrition. Ethan accepted every condition. Before leaving, Nora handed Sophie a bank card containing 500,000 yen. The money wasn't for Ethan. It belonged entirely to Sophie. The pin was Sophie's birthday. Sophie immediately tried to refuse it, but her mother wouldn't allow that. After discovering that her daughter had literally gone hungry, Nora was never going to let it happen again. If Ethan failed to keep his promises, Sophie would at least have enough money to protect herself. Then Nora gave Ethan one final warning. She would return in 1 month. If Sophie was still suffering when she came back, then whether Ethan liked it or not, Nora would take her daughter home. Ethan looked her directly in the eye and promised that in 1 month, she would see the results for herself. After Nora left, Ethan thanked Sophie for giving him another chance. But he knew words were no longer enough. He needed to prove that he had changed. So Ethan began gathering evidence. He went to Sterling Bank and obtained 3 years of salary records. The numbers finally showed exactly what had happened. Over those 3 years, Ethan had earned and handed over approximately 1.51 million yuan. During that same period, Sophie had received only 7,200 yuan for living expenses. That meant almost everything else. Approximately yuan had first been transferred into his mother's account. Now Ethan finally had the financial trail in his hands, and with the evidence documented on paper, he was ready to find out exactly where every cent of his missing money had gone. Continuing his investigation, Ethan arranged to meet Ryan at a cafe next to Nordson Tech. Ryan already knew why Ethan wanted to see him. Mia had told him that Ethan was demanding the return of all the money his mother had given them. But Ethan corrected him. Technically, he wasn't asking Ryan to repay everything. His mother was the one who had taken Ethan's salary without permission and distributed it. What Ethan wanted to know was exactly where that money had gone. Ryan admitted that he had always known the money came from Ethan's salary. However, when Ethan's mother handed it over, she described it as spare money. Ethan could hardly believe it. Over 3 years, he had earned approximately 1.5 million yuan through exhausting work, and his family had casually described it as spare cash. Still, Ethan hadn't arranged the meeting to argue. He wanted facts. Ryan admitted that he couldn't repay everything immediately because his company was supposedly going through a transition, but Ethan had already investigated that company. Its registered capital might have looked impressive on paper, but the actual paid-in capital was 0, and there were no proper annual filings. Ryan realized Ethan had done his homework, so he finally stopped hiding things. According to Ryan, he had personally received less than 300,000 yuan. More importantly, he revealed that a large portion of Ethan's missing money had gone to someone Ethan had never heard of before. A woman named Irene Benson. Ethan immediately wanted to know who she was. Ryan couldn't or wouldn't explain. He simply told Ethan to ask his mother. After checking the bank records more carefully, Ethan began reconstructing the missing money. Approximately 410,000 had gone to Mia. Ryan had received around 290,000. About 80,000 had covered his father's hospital expenses. His mother had spent roughly 120,000 on insurance, and another 300,000 had been transferred to Irene Benson. That last payment immediately caught Ethan's attention. Who was this woman? And why had his mother secretly sent her such a large amount? Ryan insisted he had told Ethan everything he knew. He agreed to take responsibility for the $290,000 he had received. But anything beyond that had nothing to do with him. Before Ethan could investigate further, another unexpected meeting was waiting for him. Victor Hale wanted to see him. When Ethan arrived, he respectfully tried to address Sophie's father as Uncle Hale. Victor immediately stopped him. As far as Victor was concerned, Ethan had not earned the right to call him family. Then Victor revealed just how much he already knew about his son-in-law. Ethan Carter was born in 1995. He had studied computer science and now worked as a senior engineer at Nordson Tech, earning $42,000 a month. He had no mortgage because the home was registered under his mother's name. He had no car loan. And despite his high salary, he had virtually no savings because he had handed everything to his mother. Victor had known all of this before Sophie ever married Ethan. 3 years earlier, when his daughter insisted on marrying him, Victor had investigated Ethan thoroughly. Ethan's education wasn't extraordinary. His family was ordinary. But at the time, Victor believed Ethan had good character. So despite disapproving of the marriage, he eventually allowed Sophie to make her own choice. He thought his daughter might learn something from the experience. What Victor never expected was that 3 years later, Sophie would become so malnourished that she developed a serious stomach ulcer. His daughter had been forced to survive on only 200 yuan a month and sometimes didn't even have enough money to see a doctor. Ethan didn't make excuses. He admitted that he had failed. He had neglected his responsibilities as a husband and failed to protect Sophie when she needed him, but he promised Victor that he was changing. Victor wasn't interested in promises. Instead, he placed an offer in front of Ethan. Divorce Sophie, and Victor would give him $5 million. Ethan asked about the second option. Victor told him there wasn't one, but Ethan refused the money immediately. He understood what it might mean to go against a man as powerful as Victor Hale. Still, Sophie wanted to remain in the marriage for now, and Ethan would not sign divorce papers simply because her father offered him money. Victor argued that Sophie was being foolish and didn't understand what was best for her. But Ethan disagreed. Sophie had already suffered for 3 years. After everything she had endured, choosing to give Ethan another chance wasn't a decision anyone else had the right to make for her. It was Sophie's choice. Victor then asked Ethan whether he genuinely believed he was worthy of being married to Victor, Hale's daughter. Ethan answered honestly, no. He didn't believe he was worthy of Victor Hale's daughter. He simply wanted to become worthy of his wife, Sophie. Victor still wasn't convinced. Nora had given Ethan 1 month to prove himself. Victor gave him only 3 days. If Ethan failed to satisfy him within those 3 days, Victor would personally take Sophie away. Before leaving, Victor gave Ethan one final warning. If Sophie lost even 1 more pound because of him, Ethan would answer to her father. Ethan accepted the warning, but he still had another mystery to solve. He went to his father and asked about Irene Benson. His father hesitated before finally revealing that Irene was Ethan's mother's cousin, someone Ethan should technically have known as an aunt. That only made Ethan more suspicious. Why had he barely heard anything about this woman? And why had his mother transferred 300,000 yuan to her? When Ethan pressed his father for an explanation, his father became uncomfortable and told him to stop asking questions. He said Ethan would understand eventually. But Ethan had already seen Irene Benson's name in the bank records Ryan had given him. He even had information pointing to the bank branch connected to her account in Dotton. After uncovering one family secret after another, Ethan had no intention of stopping now, because the missing 300,000 yuan was beginning to look like something his parents desperately did not want him to discover. Continuing his investigation, Ethan arranged to meet Ryan at a cafe next to Nordson Tech. Ryan already knew why Ethan wanted to see him. Mia had told him that Ethan was demanding the return of all the money his mother had given them, but Ethan corrected him. Technically, he wasn't asking Ryan to repay everything. His mother was the one who had taken Ethan's salary without permission and distributed it. What Ethan wanted to know was exactly where that money had gone. Ryan admitted that he had always known the money came from Ethan's salary. However, when Ethan's mother handed it over, she described it as spare money. Ethan could hardly believe it. Over 3 years, he had earned approximately 1.5 million yuan through exhausting work, and his family had casually described it as spare cash. Still, Ethan hadn't arranged the meeting to argue. He wanted facts. Ryan admitted that he couldn't repay everything immediately because his company was supposedly going through a transition, but Ethan had already investigated that company. Its registered capital might have looked impressive on paper, but the actual paid-in capital was zero, and there were no proper annual filings. Ryan realized Ethan had done his homework, so he finally stopped hiding things. According to Ryan, he had personally received less than 300,000 yuan. More importantly, he revealed that a large portion of Ethan's missing money had gone to someone Ethan had never heard of before, a woman named Irene Benson. Ethan immediately wanted to know who she was. Ryan couldn't or wouldn't explain. He simply told Ethan to ask his mother. After checking the bank records more carefully, Ethan began reconstructing the missing money. Approximately 410,000 had gone to Mia. Ryan had received around 290,000. About 80,000 had covered his father's hospital expenses. His mother had spent roughly 120,000 on insurance, and another 300,000 had been transferred to Irene Benson. That last payment immediately caught Ethan's attention. Who was this woman? And why had his mother secretly sent her such a large amount? Ryan insisted he had told Ethan everything he knew. He agreed to take responsibility for the 290,000 he had received, but anything beyond that had nothing to do with him. Before Ethan could investigate further, another unexpected meeting was waiting for him. Victor Hale wanted to see him. When Ethan arrived, he respectfully tried to address Sophie's father as Uncle Hale. Victor immediately stopped him. As far as Victor was concerned, Ethan had not earned the right to call him family. Then Victor revealed just how much he already knew about his son-in-law. Ethan Carter was born in 1995. He had studied computer science and now worked as a senior engineer at Nordson Tech, earning $42,000 a month. He had no mortgage because the home was registered under his mother's name. He had no car loan. And despite his high salary, he had virtually no savings because he had handed everything to his mother. Victor had known all of this before Sophie ever married Ethan. 3 years earlier, when his daughter insisted on marrying him, Victor had investigated Ethan thoroughly. Ethan's education wasn't extraordinary. His family was ordinary. But at the time, Victor believed Ethan had good character. So despite disapproving of the marriage, he eventually allowed Sophie to make her own choice. He thought his daughter might learn something from the experience. What Victor never expected was that 3 years later, Sophie would become so malnourished that she developed a serious stomach ulcer. His daughter had been forced to survive on only 200 yuan a month and sometimes didn't even have enough money to see a doctor. Ethan didn't make excuses. He admitted that he had failed. He had neglected his responsibilities as a husband and failed to protect Sophie when she needed him, but he promised Victor that he was changing. Victor wasn't interested in promises. Instead, he placed an offer in front of Ethan. Divorce Sophie, and Victor would give him $5 million. Ethan asked about the second option. Victor told him there wasn't one, but Ethan refused the money immediately. He understood what it might mean to go against a man as powerful as Victor Hale. Still, Sophie wanted to remain in the marriage for now, and Ethan would not sign divorce papers simply because her father offered him money. Victor argued that Sophie was being foolish and didn't understand what was best for her. But Ethan disagreed. Sophie had already suffered for 3 years. After everything she had endured, choosing to give Ethan another chance wasn't a decision anyone else had the right to make for her. It was Sophie's choice. Victor then asked Ethan whether he genuinely believed he was worthy of being married to Victor, Hale's daughter. Ethan answered honestly, no. He didn't believe he was worthy of Victor Hale's daughter. He simply wanted to become worthy of his wife, Sophie. Victor still wasn't convinced. Nora had given Ethan 1 month to prove himself. Victor gave him only 3 days. If Ethan failed to satisfy him within those 3 days, Victor would personally take Sophie away. Before leaving, Victor gave Ethan one final warning. If Sophie lost even 1 more pound because of him, Ethan would answer to her father. Ethan accepted the warning, but he still had another mystery to solve. He went to his father and asked about Irene Benson. His father hesitated before finally revealing that Irene was Ethan's mother's cousin, someone Ethan should technically have known as an aunt. That only made Ethan more suspicious. Why had he barely heard anything about this woman, and why had his mother transferred 300,000 yuan to her? When Ethan pressed his father for an explanation, his father became uncomfortable and told him to stop asking questions. He said Ethan would understand eventually. But Ethan had already seen Irene Benson's name in the bank records Ryan had given him. He even had information pointing to the bank branch connected to her account in Dotton. After uncovering one family secret after another, Ethan had no intention of stopping now. Because the missing 300,000 yuan was beginning to look like something his parents desperately did not want him to discover. After everything that had happened with Ryan, Ethan agreed to take his mother home. He also promised that he would help deal with Mia's house and the financial disaster Ryan had left behind. But this time, Ethan set a clear condition. For 3 years, his money had been taken and given to Mia without his permission. That money still had to be repaid. Ethan wasn't demanding everything immediately. Mia could repay it gradually, even year by year, but there would be no more avoiding the debt. His mother finally admitted that she had been wrong. For years, she had favored Mia. Whenever Mia wanted something, she found a way to give it to her, often using Ethan's money without considering how it affected him or Sophie. But then she revealed the secret she had been desperately trying to hide. Ethan wasn't her biological son. Ethan calmly told her that she didn't need to explain. He already knew about Irene Benson. His mother was stunned. She realized Ethan had gone to Dawson and found Irene himself. Ethan then told her that Irene had suffered a stroke and was currently in the hospital. Hearing this, his mother became emotional. She admitted that she had planned to keep the truth from Ethan for the rest of her life. But Ethan told her that some truths simply couldn't stay hidden forever. Still, he wasn't interested in punishing her for what happened 30 years ago. As far as Ethan was concerned, the past was the past. But there was one thing he could not ignore. What his mother had done to Sophie. An apology alone could never erase 3 years of suffering. Later, Ethan sat down with his father and finally heard the complete story of his childhood. 30 years earlier, Irene had been young, unmarried, and pregnant. The baby's father disappeared, and Irene's family refused to accept the situation. At the same time, Marion desperately wanted a child but had been unable to become pregnant. So Marion took Ethan in and raised him as her own son. For the first few years, Ethan truly was the center of her world. But when Ethan was around 3 years old, something unexpected happened. Marion became pregnant. Mia was born. It was a pregnancy no one had expected. And from that moment, something slowly changed inside Marion. Mia was her biological daughter, her own flesh and blood. Marion never completely stopped caring about Ethan, but her feelings toward the 2 children were never equal again. When Mia needed something, Marion instinctively put her first. With Ethan, there was always something missing. She cared about him, but somehow it was always one step less. For Ethan, the revelation finally explained much of his childhood and the favoritism he had experienced as an adult. But he told his father he wasn't going to blame him. And he didn't blame Irene either. His father then asked Ethan for one favor. Despite everything Mia had done, could Ethan still help his sister? Ethan agreed. He would help deal with Ryan, the mortgage, and Mia's situation. But helping Mia did not mean pretending the missing money never existed. The account still had to be settled. Mia would repay what she owed, and Marion would also have to take responsibility for her part. His father warned him that Marion would never accept that easily. After raising Ethan for 30 years, she would probably believe he owed her. And once again, she might blame Sophie for turning him against the family, but Ethan was prepared. He had already sent a formal legal notice. This was no longer something his family could simply refuse to discuss. For Ethan, there was one reason he refused to back down. Sophie. She had suffered for 3 years. She developed a stomach ulcer from malnutrition. She had been forced to survive on 200 yuan a month and sometimes couldn't even afford proper medical care. Ethan could forgive many things that had been done to him, but he could no longer ignore what had been done to his wife. His father finally agreed to speak with Marion and help settle everything properly. Afterward, Ethan returned to the hospital to see Irene. Irene was recovering and still had more than yuan remaining from the money Marion had sent her. She wanted Ethan to take it back, but Ethan refused. He told her to keep the money. Irene apologized again, saying that Ethan owed her nothing because she was the one who had given him away all those years ago. But Ethan understood that she had been young, frightened, and trapped by circumstances. Before leaving, Irene looked at Ethan closely and told him how much he resembled his biological father. Ethan asked whether she still had any contact with the man, but Irene avoided going deeper into the subject and told Ethan to go home. She was recovering well, and Dr. Hayes expected her to be discharged within a few days. Ethan arranged for a caregiver to stay with her and told Irene to call him if she needed anything. Then he headed home. On the way, Sophie called him. His mother was already there. This time, Marion had come alone. Ethan immediately told Sophie not to provoke her and promised he was almost home, but something unexpected happened before he arrived. Marion hadn't come to fight. She had come to apologize. When Ethan returned, his mother asked Sophie to hear her out. Then for the first time, Marion admitted directly that what she had done over the past 3 years was wrong. Giving Sophie only 200 yuan a month had been cruel. She acknowledged that Sophie had suffered because of her. Marion didn't demand forgiveness. Instead, she promised that from now on, she would stop interfering in Ethan and Sophie's marriage. Sophie remained cautious. She wasn't ready to simply forget everything that had happened, but she told Marion that she wasn't holding on to anger either. All she wanted was for Marion to keep her promise. Then the conversation turned to Mia. Ethan explained that he had already hired a lawyer and that the legal process was moving forward. Mia was still his sister. Despite everything, he wasn't going to abandon her while she was pregnant and dealing with the disaster Ryan had created. He would help her. But helping her did not mean erasing the debt or pretending nothing had happened. For the first time, Marion seemed to accept Ethan's boundaries, and despite the painful truth about his birth, she told him something that still mattered. Whatever had happened between them, to her, Ethan was still her son. As Irene continued recovering, Ethan made sure she had everything she needed. Irene thanked him for taking care of her, but Ethan told her there was no need. He simply reminded her to go home, rest properly, and keep taking her medication. Not long afterward, Marion came to visit Irene herself. After 30 years of resentment and secrets, the two women finally sat down together. Marion apologized for taking Ethan all those years ago, but Irene no longer wanted to live in the past. She told Marion there was nothing more to say. Marion had raised Ethan for 30 years. It was true that after Mia was born, she had favored her biological daughter, but Ethan had still grown up with food, clothing, and a home. Irene chose to forgive her. From that moment on, she hoped they could stop treating each other like enemies and finally become one family. Meanwhile, the situation with Ryan finally reached a turning point. The police caught him. After disappearing with the car and leaving behind enormous debts, Ryan was arrested, and some of the missing money connected to Mia's house was recovered. The rest would be decided through the courts. Mia also returned to face Ethan and Sophie. This time, she was completely different. She apologized for all the cruel things she had said, especially the way she had treated Sophie. Sophie accepted the apology and told Mia to take care of herself. Then Ethan asked about the baby. Mia revealed that she had ended the pregnancy. After Ryan abandoned her, she felt she couldn't bring a child into the world without a stable father or the financial ability to raise it. She had also recovered part of the money she owed Ethan. Mia promised to find a job and repay the remaining debt gradually. But Ethan no longer wanted to destroy his sister over money. He told her to focus on getting herself back on her feet first. The remaining debt could wait. With the family conflicts finally beginning to settle, Ethan and Sophie could focus on rebuilding their marriage. And Ethan had changed in another unexpected way. The man who once complained about coming home without dinner was now standing in the kitchen cooking for his wife. When Sophie complimented the food, Ethan proudly joked that he was simply a natural cook. Then Sophie announced that her parents were coming over. They were already on their way. When Victor and Nora arrived, Ethan invited them to sit down and try the meal he had prepared. By now, they had already heard everything that had happened. Ethan also made his position clear about Marion. Despite discovering that she wasn't his biological mother, he had no intention of abandoning her. She had raised him for 30 years. Whatever mistakes she had made, he couldn't simply erase that relationship. Surprisingly, Victor approved. In fact, he told Ethan that he had handled the entire situation better than expected. Victor explained that the kind of son-in-law he wanted wasn't a man who would abandon his own family the moment he discovered his wife came from money. Ethan had done something more difficult. He had learned to distinguish between right and wrong. He demanded accountability from his mother and sister without completely cutting them out of his life. He helped Mia when she was in trouble, but still required her to take responsibility. He protected Sophie, established clear boundaries with his family, and finally began behaving like the husband she deserved. Victor had also investigated Ethan's performance at Nordson Tech, and what he found impressed him. Ethan was genuinely talented at his job, so Victor offered him an opportunity to join Hale Group. Ethan hesitated. He worried that he might not be good enough for such a large company. But Victor made one thing clear. There would be no special treatment. Ethan was being given an opportunity, nothing more. Whether he succeeded and remained at Hale Group would depend entirely on his own ability. Ethan immediately promised to work hard. Then Sophie noticed something funny. Ethan was still addressing Victor formally as Sir. She quickly corrected him. After everything they had been through, Victor wasn't simply Mr. Hale anymore. He was Ethan's father-in-law. And this time Victor didn't object. Nora looked at the young couple and finally seemed satisfied. 3 years of marriage had nearly destroyed Sophie. But after betrayal, illness, family secrets, missing money, and countless confrontations, Ethan had finally learned what marriage actually required. It wasn't about handing over a paycheck. It wasn't about blindly obeying parents. And it wasn't about choosing between a wife and a family. It was about knowing right from wrong, protecting the person beside you, setting boundaries, and taking responsibility when you failed. Ethan couldn't change the first 3 years of their marriage, but Sophie had given him another chance. And this time, he understood exactly how precious that chance was. Because real happiness begins when you learn to cherish the people who truly matter.